My name is Clara Jensen. I'm 59 years old, a widow, and for the last 19 years, I've been the office manager at Caldwell and Walker Law. It's a quiet life lived in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon, and that's how I've preferred it. Quiet means stable, predictable. After my husband, Richard, died so suddenly, leaving me with two teenagers staring at me with his same bewildered eyes, stability became my religion. My entire world was rebuilt on that single foundation, making sure my children never had to feel the ground fall away beneath their feet the way I did. Alina, my daughter, just turned 32. My son, Leo, is 29. I look at them and see two successful, confident adults, and a quiet, fierce pride swells in my chest. It's a pride that feels earned, paid for in installments over 2 decades of skipped lunches, postponed vacations, and a car I've driven for 14 years. I built a bridge for them with my own two hands, and all I ever wanted was to watch them walk across it to a better life. For the last few months, that better life had a name: Napa Valley, Alina's wedding. The phone calls had been a flurry of excitement, her voice buzzing with talk of venues that looked like Tuscan villas and florists who could weave magic with peonies. I'd sit at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, tracing the wood grain with my finger as I listened. I could picture it all so perfectly. My daughter, radiant in white, standing under an arch of flowers with the golden California sun setting behind her. I wanted her to have that perfect day. She deserved it. And when she'd called a few weeks ago, her voice tight with anxiety over a non-refundable venue deposit, I didn't hesitate. A mother doesn't. "I can help, sweetie," I said, my voice calm and reassuring. "How much do you need?" The number was $30,000. I heard her sharp intake of breath, the hesitation before she whispered it. It was a staggering amount, but I told her it was done. What I didn't tell her was where the money came from. After Richard passed, his life insurance payout felt like blood money. It was his last act of taking care of us, and for 15 years that fund sat untouched. It was a sacred trust I refused to break. It was for a true, undeniable emergency, for a catastrophe. But as I listened to my daughter speak about the first day of her new life, I convinced myself this wasn't a withdrawal, it was an investment. It was Richard's final gift, a way for him to be there, to help give his daughter the fairytale wedding he would have wanted for her. I signed the transfer papers the next day, feeling a bittersweet pang in my heart. It was a part of him finally being used to build a part of her future. I felt at peace with the decision. I felt like a good mother. That feeling of peace carried me through the weekend and into the start of the next week. It was Tuesday morning. The Oregon air was crisp, and a pale, early spring sunlight filtered through my kitchen window, falling across the worn oak of my table. My coffee was hot and strong, and the house was filled with a comfortable silence. It felt like any other Tuesday. Then my laptop, sitting open on the table, chimed with the arrival of a new email. It was from Alina. My heart gave a little flutter of anticipation. I smiled before I even clicked on it. Maybe it was a picture from her dress fitting, or a link to the caterer's menu she wanted my opinion on. Her name just sat there in my inbox, no subject line. A small, curious detail, but I thought nothing of it as I opened the message. The smile vanished, it didn't fade, it was extinguished as if a switch had been flipped. The email started with a single word. Mom. Not hi mom, not dearest mom, just mom. It wasn't a greeting, it was a label, a heading on a memo. My eyes scanned the lines of text that followed, and the words felt like foreign objects, sharp and sterile. Alina explained, in language that felt like it had been drafted by a corporate lawyer, that she and her fiancé, Marcus, along with his family, had finalized the guest list for the ceremony. After much thought and careful consideration, they had decided it would be best for me to watch the wedding via livestream, not in person. The air in my lungs seemed to turn to ice. She added that Marcus's mother, Victoria, was particularly concerned about the guest count and wanted to keep the event as intimate as possible. At the bottom, just before her name, was a line that felt like a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. If you want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Meet link we've created. Should be just like being there. And then, sitting alone on the final line, were 3 letters that twisted the knife. LOL. It was a gunshot in a library, a joke at a funeral. It was the casual dismissal of my entire existence, the careless laughter at the very idea that this might hurt me. My world, which had felt so stable and quiet just moments before, suddenly tilted on its axis. The warmth from the coffee cup in my hands seeped away, and a profound, chilling cold began to spread through my chest, freezing everything in its path. I stared at that screen for a long time, I don't know how long. Time seemed to stop, or at least slow to a thick, syrupy crawl. The steam rising from my coffee thinned and vanished. The coffee grew cold. My hands, resting on the table, didn't tremble. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears, too profound for a simple physical reaction. It was a clean, surgical wound to the soul, and the bleeding was all internal. Something inside me quietly shifted. It felt like the ground had cracked open in a perfect, silent line right beneath my chair, but I was still sitting there, suspended over the abyss. The world had ended, but no one had bothered to tell my body. My focus narrowed to the three letters, LOL, blinking on the screen like a neon sign in hell. It was the punctuation mark on my life as a mother. My support, my love, my sacrifices, it was all a joke, a punchline. The $30,000, Richard's legacy, wasn't a sacred gift. It was just the price of a ticket to a show I wasn't even allowed to see. It was the cost of my own irrelevance. I didn't feel anger. Anger would have been a relief, a hot, cleansing fire. Instead, I felt a chilling, hollow clarity. The kind of clarity you get right after a car crash, when the world is suddenly silent and sharp-edged. My fingers moved, seemingly of their own accord, across the keyboard. I clicked reply. The cursor blinked in the empty white box, waiting. I typed 4 words, just 4. Sure, enjoy your big day. No emotion, no argument, no questions. It was a quiet, final withdrawal, a door being softly closed. I knew deep down that those 4 words would echo louder than any scream I could ever unleash. I hit send. Then, with that same robotic calm, I closed the laptop. I picked up my cold coffee, carried it to the sink, and poured it down the drain. I went upstairs and got ready for work like it was any other Tuesday. The routine was an anchor in a world that had come unmoored. To fall apart now, to dissolve into grief, would be to let them win, to let them see the wound. And I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But I knew, as I buttoned my blouse and looked at the stranger in the mirror, that it wasn't just any other Tuesday. It was the day I stopped pretending my sacrifices were investments of love. I finally saw them for what they were, uncashed checks from a bank that had long since gone bankrupt. The drive to the office was quiet. Oregon's early spring air still held a chill that seeped through the car's vents, but I barely noticed. I drove the same route I'd taken for 19 years, my hands moving the wheel automatically, but I wasn't seeing the familiar storefronts or the budding trees. I was seeing ghosts. Every corner, every intersection held a memory, and today they all rose up to meet me, their faces twisted into accusatory sneers. There was the community dance hall where I'd spent my 35th birthday working a double shift as a waitress, a side job I'd taken, just so I could afford Alina's brand new ballet point shoes. I remember watching her face light up when she saw them, and I told myself that her joy was a better gift than any birthday cake. I passed the small, sad-looking pawn shop on Franklin Boulevard. My throat tightened. I hadn't thought about that place in years. It was where I sold my own mother's gold locket, the one she gave me on her deathbed, to cover the cost of Leo's unexpectedly expensive organic chemistry textbooks. I'd cried as the man behind the counter weighed it in his palm, but I wiped my tears before I got home, telling myself that my mother would have understood. A piece of the past for a piece of his future. It felt like a fair trade at the time. All these moments, these countless little surrenders of self, had felt so noble then. I'd worn them like badges of honor, the quiet, gleaming medals of a good mother. I never kept score. I told myself that's what mothers do. They pour themselves out so their children's cups can be full. But this morning, driving through the landscape of my own history, the memories didn't feel noble. They felt foolish. Each one was a line item on an invoice that had never been paid. The vacations I postponed, the new shoes I didn't buy, the friends I lost touch with, it wasn't a bridge I was building. It was a pyre. And I was the one who had been patiently setting myself on fire all these years, hoping someone would notice the warmth. They hadn't, they had just assumed I was supposed to burn. The question echoed in the silent car, a drumbeat against the hum of the engine. How did we get here? No, that wasn't right. The real question, the one that truly terrified me, was simpler. Had we ever been anywhere else? I sat down at my desk, the familiar weight of my chair a small, inadequate comfort. The office was beginning to stir, the low hum of computers and quiet morning greetings filling the air. I went through the motions, turning on my monitor, my fingers finding the password on the keyboard without conscious thought. But my mind was a million miles away, sifting through the wreckage of the past, looking for an answer. And then it started to crystallize. Like a photograph developing in a darkroom, a hidden picture began to emerge from the blackness. This wasn't a sudden, thoughtless act of cruelty from my daughter. It was the final, logical step in a long and calculated campaign. It was the culmination of a pattern I had willfully ignored for years. My mind zeroed in on Marcus, her fiancé, and his mother, Victoria Hamilton. I remembered the first time Victoria came to my house for dinner. She swept into my small, clean living room, her eyes scanning everything with a polite, dismissive smile. "Oh, Clara," she'd said, running a manicured finger over my worn oak mantelpiece, "your home is just so quaint, so authentic." The word quaint hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult disguised as a compliment. It was what you called something small and old and ultimately insignificant. Later that evening, Marcus had been telling a story about his and Alina's plans to travel, and he'd laughed, draping an arm around my daughter. "We have to show her the world," he'd said, winking at me. "Give her a chance to finally escape." He said it like a joke, and Alina had just smiled a little too brightly, but the word echoed in my mind, escape. As if the life I had built for her, the life I had bled for, was a prison she needed to be freed from. I had brushed it all off. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how wealthy people were, a little out of touch, a little careless with their words. I had wanted so desperately for Alina to be happy, to be loved, that I had willingly sanded down the sharp edges of their condescension until they were smooth enough for me to swallow. But now, in the cold, harsh light of this Tuesday morning, I saw the truth. I was not family to them, I was a liability. A background detail that didn't fit the curated, glossy aesthetic of their lives. The livestream wasn't about an intimate guest list, it was a social firewall. It was a way to take my money, Richard's money, without the social inconvenience of my actual presence. The email wasn't just an uninvitation, it was an erasure. I must have sat there for an hour, staring at a legal contract on my screen without reading a single word. The letters swam in a meaningless blur. The quiet hum of the office, usually a comforting backdrop to my day, felt distant and muffled, like I was listening to the world from underwater. I was so lost in the cold, sharp-edged landscape of my own thoughts that I didn't hear him approach. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Clara." I blinked, my eyes slowly coming back into focus. My boss, David Caldwell, was standing beside my desk. He's one of the founding partners, a man I've worked for and with for 19 years. He's one of those rare men who remembers the names of your children and how you take your coffee. He placed a steaming latte from the cafe downstairs on my desk, the rich, sweet smell of it cutting through the stale air of my revelation. I wanted to tell him. The words were right there, a toxic lump in my throat. My daughter just disinvited me from her wedding via email. My children, the ones you've asked about every Monday morning for 2 decades, don't see me as a person anymore. The confession was so close to the surface, a desperate plea to be seen. But I couldn't. Admitting it out loud would make it irrevocably real. So instead, I manufactured a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Just a rough night's sleep, David. Thank you for this." He studied my face for a second longer, his eyes kind and perceptive. He knew I was lying, but he didn't push. He just gave a small, understanding nod and walked back to his office. That small, unconditional act of kindness nearly undid me. The coffee, the gentle concern, the silent offer of support, it was a simple human decency that my own flesh and blood had denied me. And in the stark contrast, the true depth of their cruelty was thrown into sharp relief. After all the noise in my head that morning, his quiet gesture reminded me that I still existed. That I still mattered, even if it was just to the man who signed my paychecks. It didn't break me. It did something far more dangerous. It reminded me I was strong. I sipped the latte, the warmth of the cup a small anchor in the storm. David's kindness had cleared away some of the fog of pain, and in its place, a cold, hard shoreline was coming into view. I was no longer drowning in sorrow. I was standing on solid ground, and I could finally see the full extent of the wreckage. It was around lunchtime when my phone, lying face down on my desk, began to vibrate. The sharp, buzzing sound cut through the office hum, and a jolt went through me. I knew who it was. I turned the phone over. Elena's name glowed on the screen. A few hours ago, that name would have brought a rush of affection. Now, it looked like the name of a stranger. It was a spotlight I didn't want, a summons to a courtroom where I had already been tried and found guilty. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A moment later, it buzzed again and again. After the third missed call, the texts started. I watched them appear on the lock screen, one after another, a rapid-fire assault. The first read, "Mom," you replied, "please answer my call. We need to talk about this." I stared at it, my face impassive. A minute passed. The second, "Ignoring me isn't going to solve anything. This is childish." The word childish struck me. For 32 years, I had been the adult, the stable center of her universe. Now, in the space of a single morning, I had been demoted to a pouting child. The third message, the one that sealed it, arrived 5 minutes later. "Seriously, why are you being so dramatic? It's not a big deal. I was just trying to make things easier for everyone." There it was, the plain, undeniable proof. There was no remorse, no flicker of understanding that she might have hurt me. There was only annoyance. My pain was an inconvenience, a drama getting in the way of her perfectly planned day. I wasn't a mother to be honored. I was a problem to be managed. I read the words over and over, and with each reading, a layer of my old self slewed away. The mother who would have called back, crying, begging for an explanation. The woman who would have apologized for her own feelings just to keep the peace. She was gone. I just sat there, sipping my latte, and thought, maybe it's time to stop being the one who always answers. Maybe it's time to stop playing a role in someone else's story when they won't even let you on the stage. That afternoon, I made a decision that would shift the ground beneath all of us. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to beg. I was going to do something far more powerful. I was going to act. The clock on my computer screen finally hit 5 o'clock. I didn't linger. I packed my bag, said a quiet goodnight to the security guard, and walked out into the cool evening air. But I didn't turn left towards home. I turned right towards the First Federal Bank just a few blocks down. With every step, I felt the numbness of the morning being replaced by something else, something sharp and focused, a plan. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting to someone else's needs. I was charting my own course. The bank was quiet. The branch manager, a kind man named Mr. Hernandez, who had helped me set up college funds and adjust my retirement contributions over the years, greeted me by name. "Clara," he smiled, standing to shake my hand. "What can I do for you today?" I sat down across from his polished desk and placed my purse on the floor. My voice when I spoke was calm, almost too calm. "I need to cancel a pending wire transfer," I said. He blinked, surprised. "Of course, the one to the Napa Valley venue." "Yes," I said, "that one." He hesitated, his professionalism kicking in. "There may be a cancellation fee depending on the timing. May I ask why the change of plans?" My eyes met his. "The circumstances have changed." I offered no other explanation, and he was too polite to ask for one. He typed for a moment on his keyboard. "You're in luck," he said, looking up from his screen. "It hasn't processed yet. We can stop it right now." He paused, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Are you sure, Clara? $50,000 is a significant amount." I nodded once. "I'm sure." He printed a form and I signed it with a steady hand. He typed a few more commands and then said, "All right, it's done. The funds have been returned to your savings account." "Thank you," I said, but I didn't get up to leave. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small slip of paper, sliding it across the desk to him. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice still perfectly level. "I'd like to wire the full $50,000 to this account, effective immediately." Mr. Hernandez picked up the paper, his eyebrows shooting up as he read the name of a world-renowned luxury travel agency. He looked from the paper to my face, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Clara, are you certain this is for a vacation? I gave him the first genuine, unforced smile of the day. It felt small, but it was real. Yes, I said, it's for a trip to Italy, the one my husband and I always planned to take. The drive home was different. The ghosts of the morning commute had receded, replaced by a quiet, humming sense of purpose. I wasn't happy, not in the way people usually think of it. This was something colder, something sharper. It was the grim satisfaction of a debt being settled. When I walked through my front door, the first thing I saw was the frantic blinking of my cell phone on the kitchen counter. I walked over and picked it up. 9 missed calls from Alina, 3 from Leo, a string of texts that I didn't bother to read. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old instinct, the urge to answer, to smooth things over, to manage their failings. Then I took a deep breath, pressed and held the power button on the side, and watched the screen go black. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence of my own making. I went to the small wine rack in my dining room, a gift from Richard years ago. My fingers brushed past the everyday bottles until they found the one I was looking for. A 2012 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. It was expensive, special. Alina and I had picked it out together on a rare, happy mother-daughter weekend trip the year before. We bought 2 bottles. One for her to keep in her cellar, and one for me to bring to her rehearsal dinner. We made a promise to open it that night and toast to her future. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. With a steady hand, I uncorked the bottle, the soft pop echoing in the quiet house. I poured a generous glass, the dark red wine swirling like liquid velvet. I took the glass out to the back porch and sat in my favorite wicker chair, the one that caught the last of the evening sun. Birds chirped in the oak trees, a neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Everything felt still, peaceful. And as I took the first sip of that rich, beautiful wine, the memories began to stir again. Not the painful ghosts from the morning, but a different sort. All the birthdays I'd planned alone. All the holiday dinners where I pretended I wasn't waiting for a call that never came. All the small, invisible sacrifices that nobody had ever tallied up. For years, the silence of this house had felt like a synonym for loneliness. It was the sound of Richard's absence, the sound of an empty nest. But tonight, it sounded different. Tonight, it was the sound of strength, the sound of a boundary being drawn, the sound of my own, long-forgotten freedom. I was halfway through my second glass of wine when the doorbell rang. The sharp, slicing sound cut through the tranquil twilight. I didn't jump, I had been expecting it in one form or another. The peace I had found was a fortress, but I knew the enemy was massing at the gates. I calmly placed my wine glass on the small porch table, walked through the house, and opened the front door. It was Leo. He was still in his office clothes, his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. His hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked stressed, uncomfortable, and in his hand he held his phone, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. He held it like a weapon, or maybe a shield. He didn't look at me with the concern of a son for his mother. He looked at me with the weary frustration of an envoy sent to deal with a hostile foreign power. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp with agitation. He stepped inside before I could even speak, his eyes scanning the living room as if looking for signs of a breakdown. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Elena's freaking out." I shut the door calmly behind him, the quiet click of the latch punctuating his frantic energy. "Hello to you too, Leo." He barely registered my words. He was already packing a short, tight line on my living room rug. "She says you're not coming to the wedding now, that you're being deliberately difficult. She says you're trying to ruin everything just to be selfish." The accusations, designed to trigger a lifetime of maternal guilt, landed with a dull thud. They found nothing to hold on to. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound without humor, dry and brittle. It startled him, and he stopped packing to stare at me. "Difficult?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I leaned against the door frame. "I'm being difficult for not attending a wedding I was explicitly uninvited from. Help me understand the logic there, Leo." He shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable under my calm, direct gaze. The carefully prepared script he'd come to deliver was already failing him. Leo's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. It's not that simple," he stammered, falling back on the talking points he had clearly been fed. Marcus's parents, the Hamiltons, are footing most of the bill. You know how traditional they are. They have a certain way of doing things. Traditional, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I see. And what part of tradition involves cashing a $30,000 check from the groom's simple mother-in-law and then telling her to stay home? Because I was also about to send another 50,000, does that count as traditional? Leo froze, his packing stopped dead. Wait, what, another 50? The genuine shock on his face was almost comical. Of course, he didn't know. Alina had taken my money but hadn't bothered to share the details with her own brother. Alina said, she said you were just helping a little with the florist. I was helping, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, but not anymore. His face went pale as the implications began to sink in. Mom, they're counting on that, the venue, the caterer. Not my problem anymore, Leo, I said evenly. His voice rose, cracking with panic. Of course, it's your problem, she's your daughter. And I am her mother, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. A mother who was told her presence was not required, only her bank account. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of pure desperation. And in that desperation, the ugly, unvarnished truth finally spilled out, a torrent of words he couldn't control. It's not just about the money, Mom, it's, look, the Hamiltons are, particular, they think you're a bit simple, a bit common. The words hung in the air between us, hideous and undeniable. This was a chance for Alina to finally, marry up, to have a different kind of life. He saw the look on my face then, the utter stillness, and I think for a second he realized what he'd just admitted. A flicker of shame crossed his face before it was immediately replaced by a fresh wave of defensive anger. He took a step towards me, his voice raw. For God's sake, can't you just let her have this one thing without making it about your sacrifices? And that was it, that was the moment. He had taken 32 years of my love, my labor, my very being, and reframed it as a narcissistic burden. My sacrifices weren't gifts, they were a weapon I apparently used to control them. His words didn't break me, they did something far more permanent, they cauterized the wound. In that moment, the last vestiges of maternal obligation, of the instinct to forgive and smooth things over, burned away to nothing. All that was left was the cold, hard, inescapable truth. I looked at my son, this tall, handsome stranger standing in my living room, using my love as a weapon against me, and I felt nothing but a profound and final sense of release. The chain that had bound me to their happiness at the expense of my own had finally, blessedly snapped. My voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was softer than a whisper, but it carried across the room with the force of a tidal wave. Get out of my house. He blinked, stunned into silence. He had expected tears. He had expected arguments, recriminations, a dramatic, messy fight. He had not expected this quiet, unbreakable finality. What's Mom? You heard me, Leo, I said, my voice still firm, still soft. Get out. I took a step forward, and for the first time he looked truly afraid, not of my anger, but of my calm. No, I said, cutting off whatever excuse he was about to offer. I have given you and your sister everything I had to give. My time, my money, my heart, my soul. I am done. I am done being the villain in a story I wrote with nothing but love. He stood there for a second longer, his mouth slightly open, the script he'd been given now useless. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked to the door, opening it without looking back. He pulled it shut behind him. It didn't slam, it just clicked, a small, quiet, mechanical sound that echoed in the house like a gunshot. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of an ending. I stood there in the middle of my living room, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited for the guilt to come, for the wave of regret that I had been conditioned to feel my entire life whenever I chose myself. But it didn't come. Instead, a startling, electrifying feeling washed over me, starting in my toes and rushing up to the crown of my head. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't anger, it was freedom. A dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating freedom. I didn't feel like I had lost a son. I felt like I had finally, after 59 years, gotten myself back. I slept that night. I truly slept for the first time in years. It was a deep, dreamless, untroubled sleep, the kind that comes when a great weight has finally been lifted. The next morning, I woke up to the sun streaming through my window and a profound sense of quiet in my own soul. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and only then, with the warm mug in my hands, did I pick up my phone and turn it back on. The barrage was instantaneous. A flood of notifications, a digital tidal wave of someone else's panic. 43 missed calls, a string of frantic messages from Alina, a timeline of her dawning horror. They started around 10 p.m. the night before, filled with passive-aggressive guilt. Leo told me what you did. I can't believe you'd be so cruel, after everything I've done to try and include you. Then the tone shifted dramatically around 3:24 a.m. Mom, the venue just called. The payment didn't go through. What did you do? We're going to lose everything if we don't pay by tomorrow. Answer me. And finally, the blame. Marcus's parents are furious. They said this proves they were right about you all along. I smiled into my coffee. Of course, she didn't understand. Alina had grown up with my sacrifices woven so tightly into the fabric of her life that she never stopped to question where the comfort came from. She just assumed the safety net would always be there, that I would always be there to weave it, but not this time. As I was about to put the phone down, one more message pinged through. It was from a number I didn't recognize. My heart didn't beat any faster. I felt a cold, curious calm as I opened it. The message was not emotional, it was clinical. Clara, this is Victoria Hamilton. We have been informed of the rescinded payment for the venue. Let me be perfectly clear. We had a verbal agreement regarding your contribution. If the full funds are not reinstated within 24 hours, our lawyers will be in contact regarding a breach of promise. Frankly, your daughter was warned that your instability could become a liability. I read the message twice: breach of promise, instability, liability. These weren't the words of a future family member. They were the words of a corporate adversary. Victoria Hamilton hadn't just confirmed my decision, she had endorsed it in writing. Any last microscopic shred of doubt I might have harbored vanished in the cold, hard light of her threat. This was never about a wedding. It was a business deal, and I had just defaulted on the terms. I deleted Victoria Hamilton's message, cleared the notifications, and went to work. The threats, the panic, the drama, it all felt like noise from a distant storm. It couldn't touch the quiet, resolute calm that had settled deep within me. Around noon, David stopped by my desk. Lunch, he offered, not as a question, but as a gentle statement. That new Italian place just opened, my treat. The old me would have politely declined, preferring to eat a sandwich at my desk. The new me simply nodded. I'd like that, I said. Over pasta, he told me about his grandkids, then paused, studying me with his kind, perceptive eyes. Forgive me for saying so, Clara, but you seem lighter today, like a great weight has been lifted. I surprised myself. I told him everything. The email, the money from Richard's insurance, Leo's visit, and finally, the cold, threatening text from Victoria Hamilton. I laid the whole ugly story out on the table between us. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he just shook his head slowly. He told me, his voice quiet, about the time he and his wife had to refuse to bail out their own son's failing business. Hardest thing we ever did, he said. He didn't speak to us for a year, but it forced him to stand on his own feet. It saved him, and in the long run, it saved our relationship. He reached across the table and briefly squeezed my hand. You're not just setting a boundary, Clara. You're teaching them a lesson about consequences they are long overdue to learn. You did the right thing. For the first time, I didn't just feel it, I believed it. That evening, as I was watering the plants on my porch, a car pulled up. It was Maya, Alina's best friend since 5th grade. She got out of the car hesitantly, her face etched with worry. I had hosted 100 of her sleepovers, baked 1,000 of her favorite cookies. I let her in and made tea, and we stood in the kitchen in an awkward silence. She's a mess, Clara, Maya finally whispered, staring into her mug. They lost the venue, the florist dropped out, the Hamiltons are threatening to cancel everything. She knows she messed up. Is that why you're here? I asked gently. To fix it. She shook her head and tears welled in her eyes. No, she said, her voice cracking. I'm here because I feel guilty. I should have said something sooner. She took a shaky breath. She's been complaining for months about how much the wedding was costing you, about how needy you were being about wanting to be involved. When Victoria suggested the livestream, Clara, she was relieved. She told me it was the perfect solution to keep everyone happy. It was the final heartbreaking piece of the puzzle, the last nail in the coffin of the mother I used to be. but it didn't hurt. It was just information. It was the truth. Thank you for telling me, Maya, I said, my voice even. Is there anything she can do? Maya asked, her voice full of a hope I no longer possessed. I looked at this sweet young woman who had grown up in my kitchen. Words are easy, Maya, especially when people are desperate, I said quietly. But the people who truly love you, they don't wait until you cut them off to finally see you. Maya hugged me gently, whispered she was sorry one last time, and walked back into the night. I closed the door and leaned against it, the cool wood of comfort against my back. And in that moment, I finally closed the door on the version of myself I had long outgrown, the woman who would have absorbed that final, devastating truth and still found a way to blame herself. The grand Napa Valley wedding, of course, never happened. According to a single terse text I received from Leah weeks later, the Hamiltons, furious at the drama, had withdrawn their support. Alina and Marcus ended up having a small, tense ceremony in the Hamiltons' perfectly manicured backyard. I wasn't invited, and for the first time in my life, I felt the profound relief of not needing to be. 2 weeks later, my boss David received a postcard at the office. On the front was a picture of the sun-drenched Colosseum in Rome. On the back, in my neat handwriting, it said, "David, you were right. Sometimes the hardest boundaries build the most beautiful bridges. To yourself, see you in a month, Clara." When I returned from Italy, my skin tanned and my heart full of art and wine and the kindness of strangers, there was one last email from Alina waiting for me. It was a long one, a rambling, emotional manifesto that was half apology, half justification, a tangled mess of "I'm sorry you felt hurt, but you have to understand the pressure I was under." I read it once not with anger, but with a distant, quiet pity for the daughter I had raised but no longer knew. Then, without a second thought, I clicked archive. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just done. There's a strange peace that comes with letting go, not in a storm of rage, but in a wave of quiet clarity. For the first time in decades, I wake up in the morning not wondering who needs something from me. I go to work, I have dinner with friends who ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. I joined a pottery class, and there is a simple, profound joy in taking a lump of shapeless clay and molding it into something beautiful with my own two hands, for no one's approval but my own. I had spent a lifetime learning how to be a mother, a wife, a provider. Now I was finally learning how to be myself. And I learned the most important lesson of all: you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes the strongest, truest kind of love is the one you finally save for yourself.